All right. So, how are we feeling? Are we feeling good about the first two of the big four? All right. So, now we're going to go into our last two of the big four. We're going to talk about character headers and dialogue. I love dialogue so much. So, I'm really excited to talk about dialogue. All right. So, character headers first. So we can't have dialogue without knowing who the hell's talking first. All right. So our character headers have to be written in all caps, right? And it's the character's name, right? It's pretty straightforward. Our character headers are just the character's name in all caps, right? It's used above any dialogue that they're talking, right? That they're speaking out loud. Okay. Now, it should be a single name, typically, right? Or it could be a Mr. or Mrs. So and so, or Mix so and so, or a title, Professor Semick, right? But typically, it's a succinct name. If they're not referred to by their full name, then you don't necessarily have to put their full name. Like Carol Baskin, you don't have to put Carol Baskin for every single time she appears. It could just be Carol, right? So it's whatever you're using. If you do start using Carol Baskin for the whole script, you got to use it for the whole script. Okay, don't go back and forth between Carol Baskin and Carol, and so on and so forth. You can't go Carol Baskin, Carol Baskin. You want to be consistent. So for me, you wouldn't refer to me as Professor Semick in one line and Rebecca in the next, and Professor Semick or Rebecca Semick. You would be consistent. Pick one and refer to me as that character name the whole rest of the script. Okay. With few exceptions, like our Get Out example where we had Andre get turned into Logan, right? That's an exception to the rule. That's for another time, another place. But in general, if these characters aren't changing, you want to keep their name the same throughout. Okay. The difference being, if for instance you have a character who we see as a younger version of themselves, right? Like a different actor needs to be casted. So, for instance, if you're casting someone to play Professor Semick as a 12-year-old, you would put 12-year-old Rebecca or tween Becca, right? Or old Becca if you're going into the future, because I'm not old right now. Go old Becca when I'm like in my 50s or 60s, older. That's not old. Older. So that's something to consider, right? Because I might need to cast someone who's a different age than I am to make it believable, right? But if it's a shorter time jump, it's only a few years plus or minus, typically we see that they use the same actor, right? They just change their hairdo, right? Um, so that would be an exception to that, where you would change their name to reflect their age to make sure that we knew that the casting was going to be different. Okay, but overall, general rule of thumb is if it's the same actor, same casting, and it's the same character, we want to keep the name consistent throughout. Okay, excuse me. Okay, so the next thing I want to reference is this idea of extensions, which was referenced in that first video on script formatting 101 that we just saw at the beginning. Okay, so extensions come on the edge of your character header. Okay, and the two main ones that you need to worry about, there's a couple other ones, but the two main ones that you need to worry about are off screen and voiceover. Okay, so these are written just to the right, always to the right. Character name first, then the extension. It's an extension of the character name, right? So to the right, in parentheses, off screen or voiceover. Okay, off screen or voiceover. So what's the difference? What's the difference? And sometimes these get confused, and even in the pro scripts, you might see them used interchangeably. They're not, but here's what you're gonna do. If we hear the character, but they aren't visible in the shot because they're in another room or off to the side of the camera, use off screen. Okay, so it means they're there, we just don't see them yet, right? So you can think of, someone who's in the bathroom having a conversation with someone in the bedroom, right? It's en suite, right? So they're right next door. Okay. and they could be having a conversation. We are only looking at one of the characters, right? The camera is in the bathroom, and we have another character who's in the bedroom that we can't see, but we can hear them, okay? And they're going back and forth, right? That's an example of off screen dialogue. That character in the bedroom is saying stuff that we can hear, but we can't see the character speaking it, okay? Now, if we hear the character, but it's more of a narration or internal thought that no one but the audience can hear, or if it's an audio that's added after the fact, you use voiceover. Okay? So, great example of this, Morgan Freeman, Shawshank Redemption, that voiceover narration. Okay? Now, here's our example. Here's what it looks like, right? Remember that our character header is in all caps and that our character extension is just to the right of it with a space and using those parentheses. So Sally, space, parentheses, voiceover, v dot w dot, close parentheses. Okay. Again, this is abbreviation, right? So v dot o dot. So put those periods in, please. It'll make you look very professional. All right, so now the moment we've all been waiting for, at least I've been waiting for it because I love me some dialogue, is dialogue. So this is our fourth of the big four. So this is used to describe the words a character is speaking aloud, either off screen or in voiceover. Okay, it's a very, very simple thing. Like whatever we're hearing being spoken aloud gets recorded as dialogue, right? And I mentioned this earlier in the last video, is that whatever's spoken, even if it seems inconsequential, even if it's so minute, we want to make sure it's referenced in dialogue. Okay? If we know what's being said or what we want to be said, we say it. If we're not sure or if we don't care, it doesn't matter, then you might put in scene action, background characters having indistinguishable conversation, right? So, like at a coffee shop or something, right? But if we do hear, if we do understand, we do know what they're going to say, and we want to know what they're going to say, we need to express it in dialogue. Okay? So these are the words that the audience will hear in the production of the movie. Okay? So say it. Say it out loud. Okay? With dialogue, we want to be as efficient with our dialogue as we are with every other part of our script, so it should only be 2 to 3 lines long. Okay? So keep it short and sweet. Recognize that just like in real life, our dialogue tends to be broken up. We talk over each other, we overlap, we interrupt, we interject. Hardly ever do we just monologue and go on and on and on and on, unless, caveat, unless that's a character trait, unless you have a character who's known for just rambling on and on and on and on and on, which you could use to your advantage. But in general, generally speaking, 2 to 3 lines long is pretty average, right? Before the next character happens or before you interject or interrupt your dialogue with some scene action, right? The goal with our scripts is we actually want a nice balance. We want a nice balance of scene action to dialogue. Okay, we want our page to have a nice black and white space. Okay, we don't want too much dialogue, so all dialogue with no scene action, but typically we also don't want just scene action with no dialogue. So we want a nice balance. Okay, and what helps with that is making sure we keep our dialogue to 2 to 3 lines, give or take. Okay, so either break it up with another character and their dialogue, or break it up with some scene action to show us what's happening. Is there anything new that's going on? Is there a new addition to the space? Is there new movement happening? Okay. So our example in this one is don't go down into the basement. Don't go down into the basement. Okay. So with every one of these big four, we've been building them and coming up with examples for each one of them. So let's look at them all together. So here we go. So here's that. So here's our example. Okay, so our example is interior house night, huddled under a blanket with only the glow from the TV lighting the living room. Sally shoves popcorn in her mouth as she nervously stares at the TV screen. Sally, voiceover, don't go down into the basement. Okay, so everything we've just seen so far built and culminated into this example. Okay, so let's recap. So we've got our scene header here, right? Interior, int period, space house, space hyphen, space night. Okay, so we've got our location of camera, our particular place of shooting, our time of day, right? We use a period here because this is an abbreviation. We use a hyphen here because this is a time, right? It goes into our time of day. So we use this like time, okay? And it's in all caps, okay? Right after our scene header, we need to have some scene action, right? We don't want to open up a scene with just a scene header and then cut straight to dialogue. We need some context, okay? So we have our scene action, very brief, says huddled under a blanket with only the glow from the TV lighting the living room, gives us a good sense of space, good sense of lighting, good sense of what's happening. Sally shoves popcorn in her mouth as she nervously stares at the TV screen, gives us some character, shows it in present tense active voice. Okay. And then we cut to our character header, Sally. Notice that's in the center of the screen, right? All caps with a space and then voiceover, open parentheses, close parentheses, periods, okay? And then goes down into the dialogue. Don't go down into the basement. So this is voiceover. This is an internal dialogue speech, okay? So this is what's happening in her internal thoughts. Okay, so she's not speaking this out loud. Okay, so this works all together to make our scene, right? Super short, super sweet. All right, so let's look at another example. This is wrong. There's a few different things wrong with this example, and I want you to try to spot them and fix it. Okay, so we have midnight, period, under the bed. Julian was in the fetal position. He cried quietly as he didn't want to be heard. Julian, off screen, don't breathe so loud. Okay? So I want you to pause this video. Literally pause it, right? Pause it and try to fix this. Okay, fix this. What's wrong with this scene? Go ahead and feel free to go backwards and look at our other scenes and the other videos and see if you can fix this scene. And in a second, I'm going to jump to the next slide and show you what's wrong with it. But I want you to really pause it and take a stab at seeing if you can fix this and see what's wrong. And if you don't know quite yet how to fix it, that's okay. But I want you to at least try to see if you know what's wrong. Okay, try to put your finger on it. Did you pause? Did you take a minute? Take a minute. All right. Hopefully you paused. Hopefully you took a minute. I'm going to go ahead and go to the next slide now and show you what's wrong with this. All right. So our scene header was all wrong. Okay. So we had midnight period under the bed, and we know that that's first. We don't use midnight, right? We don't need to, right? It's just day or night. Also is in the wrong spot, right? We have under the bed, which you could use if you wanted to be more specific, but we're still missing key things like where is this bed at, but also are we inside, are we outside, right? So to fix this, we're going to change it from midnight period, under the bed period, to interior period, Julian's bedroom dash night. Okay. So that's short, sweet, succinct, to the point. And we still express that he's under the bed by putting it in the scene action. Julian lies under his bed in the fetal position. So in the previous example, it was Julian was in the fetal position. What's wrong with this? It's in the past tense. Passive voice. Was under the bed. We want to keep it to active present tense. Okay, so we're going to Julian lies under his bed in the fetal position. In the previous slide, he cried quietly as he didn't want to be heard. In this one, he sobs silently. Okay, he sobbed silently. I made that much shorter. I put it in the present active voice. I kept it succinct, right? He sobbed silently. Still gets the same point across, only better, right? So present tense, active voice, keep it short and sweet, okay? Now, Julian voiceover, okay? So we're seeing Julian. We see him on screen. We see him under the bed. So in the previous slide, it had Julian off screen, okay, which we're not concerned with, okay? We see him, so he's not off screen. This is voiceover, just like with our Sally example, okay? So it says, don't breathe so loud, okay? So those were our major fixes, and now this scene looks good, so now we're in a good spot for it, okay? I hope that helped. Feel free to go back and try again. Try to get everything you saw and see if you can point out the errors again, okay? All right. All right, so here we have a nice visual representation of a script page. Now, this is a great reference tool to fall back on if you need it, but it kind of just highlights in a script page just the major different pieces of what we've talked about and some other stuff that we haven't yet. And we're going to kind of get into a little bit deeper here in a little bit, but just so you can see, we have our scene heading, our action, our transitions, which we saw in the video, dialogue, character's first appearance, scene heading, subheader, more, intercut, parenthetical, extension, page number. So it has all these different pieces. So this is a good reference tool if you need a quick reminder of where everything is, what it looks like, how it shows up on the page. Okay? All right, let's take a break and we're going to go into our next video here in just a second.